Most people assume modern warfare is basically just a math problem, right? You get enough troops, some advanced weapons, a ton of capital, and boom, you've breached a border. Well, today we're completely tearing up that equation. Welcome to this explainer. I'm stepping into the role of a military analyst today to run a strategic threat assessment on literally one of the most heavily fortified landmasses on Earth. We're going to break down exactly why a full-scale invasion of India is an absolute tactical nightmare. It's this devastating combination of natural defensive terrain and layered military strategy that just stops armies in their tracks.
Okay, so our threat assessment covers 5 concentric layers. We've got the geographic shield, the hostile fronts of the deserts and jungles, the maritime defensive perimeter, military and nuclear deterrents, and finally, the asymmetric and geopolitical costs. Let's dive right in.
Phase 1, the geographic shield, specifically the northern perimeter.
Look, we aren't talking about crossing a simple river or an invisible line on a map. We are talking about the Himalayas. Think about this for a second. It's a massive wall of ice and stone stretching farther than the distance from New York to Miami. For an invading force, this isn't just rough terrain. It's a thousands of kilometers long attrition zone where the environment itself is literally lethal.
This extreme environment completely strips an advancing army of its conventional advantages before a single shot is even fired. You've got steep cliffs that instantly neutralize your standard infantry formations, the sub-zero temperatures, and incredibly thin air. That means elite, highly trained troops are going to struggle just to breathe. And your mechanized advantages completely evaporate. Tanks absolutely cannot navigate those narrow mountain passes, supply trucks freeze up and break down, and your helicopter air support is totally grounded by brutal high-altitude winds.
So, moving on to Phase 2, hostile fronts, exploring the deserts and jungles.
Now you might be thinking, what if an adversary just pivots? What if they try a flanking maneuver west or east to bypass the mountains entirely? Well, doing that creates a fractured command nightmare. You are essentially fighting 2 completely different wars at the exact same time. The troops freezing up in the Himalayas cannot share supply chains, gear, or tactics with forces deployed down to the western deserts. It's a logistical dead end.
And if you shift west into the Thar Desert, you run into temperatures blasting past 50 degrees Celsius. That is blisteringly hot. Sandstorms wipe out visibility to absolute zero and choke up engine air intakes. Modern mechanized engines literally overheat and melt down. Soldier dehydration accelerates exponentially. This physiological and mechanical toll forces massive battalions to slow to an agonizing crawl, basically turning them into sitting ducks out in the open terrain.
But what if we pivot to the eastern Seven Sisters front? Here, the geography totally flips to dense jungles, torrential heavy rainfall, and steep hills with incredibly narrow valleys. From a tactical standpoint, this terrain is an absolute death trap for massive invading columns. It's the ultimate choke point. It is perfectly sculpted for local defenders to use asymmetric warfare and lay down devastating guerrilla ambushes.
And hey, this isn't just theoretical. Historical data proves that these natural choke points actually work. Back in the 1940s, WWI Japanese forces attempting an eastern push from Myanmar were stopped cold by that brutal jungle terrain. Jump to 1971, and Pakistani armored columns completely failed to cross the scorching Thar Desert during the Bangladesh Liberation War. The point is, even with today's modern military tech, conquering this extreme geography remains an empirical impossibility.
Okay, let's shift gears to Phase 3, the maritime defensive perimeter.
So if a land invasion is basically out of the question, what about a southern amphibious assault? Well, even if an invader miraculously reaches the southern beaches, they don't exactly find open, easy plains waiting for them. They immediately hit the Deccan Plateau stronghold, which is flanked by the Western Ghats along the Arabian Sea and the Eastern Ghats on the Bay of Bengal. These are elevated, heavily forested mountain ranges sitting directly at the coast, constantly pounded by heavy rainfall. Securing a beachhead and trying to advance heavy armor up into this terrain is a complete logistical nightmare.
And honestly, that's assuming they even catch sight of the beach. Before making landfall, an invading armada has to bypass India's massive blue water navy. We are talking about a fleet of over 130 active warships, submarines, and aircraft carriers. This layered maritime grid actively patrolling these oceans makes any kind of surprise amphibious assault incredibly difficult and highly deadly.
Let's move to Phase 4, military and nuclear deterrents.
Let's run a quick war game scenario. Let's imagine an invading force somehow survives the freezing mountains, the scorching deserts, the dense jungles, and the heavily patrolled oceans. What kind of hard conventional power is actually waiting for them? Well, try over 1 million active-duty soldiers, massive reserve forces, and a continent-spanning missile command. But strategically, it's not just about the sheer numbers. This military is uniquely specialized and battle-tested. They literally have active combat experience fighting on extreme high-altitude glaciers, in blistering deserts, and in dense jungles.
Now, if that massive conventional wall somehow fails, we have to factor in the ultimate strategic failsafe. India operates a full nuclear triad. Step 1, you have land-based power with the Agni missile series. Step 2, air delivery via the Mirage 2000 and Sukhoi Su-30 MKI fighter platforms. And Step 3, the critical second strike capability at sea with the INS Arihant nuclear-powered ballistic submarine. This triad guarantees a catastrophic retaliatory strike, rendering any initial victory by an invader completely irrelevant.
Which brings us to our final layer, Phase 5, asymmetric and geopolitical costs.
Let's imagine the absolute impossible for a second. An invader breaches the borders and actually captures a major piece of territory. Well, your true nightmare begins the very second you try to govern. You see, you're no longer fighting a military. You're trying to occupy a population of 1.5 billion people. The immediate scale of civilian resistance, localized protests, and urban asymmetric warfare would bleed absolutely any occupying force dry.
From an operational standpoint, policing a decentralized insurgency of this incredible magnitude is mathematically impossible. As our assessment clearly dictates, no modern power has ever successfully occupied a nation this big and this diverse. The sheer manpower required just to hold down street corners would completely bankrupt the invading nation's economy.
And finally, we have to run the geopolitical matrix. India is not isolated. It's a major, keystone geopolitical partner for the United States, Europe, Russia, and Japan. Any unprovoked invasion triggers immediate, severe international sanctions that would collapse the aggressor's supply chains, trigger widespread global backlash, and even risk direct military intervention by allied superpowers. So, attacking India isn't just a military gamble. It guarantees complete global economic disaster.
Which really brings us to the ultimate conclusion of our tactical explainer today. Think about it. If the geography literally freezes your armor, if a battle-tested million-man military holds the line, if 1.5 billion civilians absolutely refuse to yield, and geopolitics crashes your economy, is any invasion ever really worth the cost? That is the harsh reality of the invader's dilemma, and it perfectly proves why a military campaign here remains strategically impossible. Thanks so much for joining me for this threat assessment, and I'll catch you next time.